Edwin Canestracci here, and that's right, we're finally doing a Black Sabbath Rank-A-Rama. There you go, drinking a little cognac. I'm a sophisticated middle-aged divorced man in my condo discussing Black Sabbath with some cognac, not just any cognac, the Henny, that's right. Little Hennessy. According to Ozzy Osbourne in his autobiography, which I read many moons ago, this is one of his favorite drinks, or was one of his favorite drinks. So I've been promising a Black Sabbath Rank-A-Rama for a long time. In fact, for many, many years. Yes, first I did my Black Sabbath Halloween special with the one and only Boo Berry. Hey, if you can spot Boo Berry, if you saw Boo Berry and know where he is, say where he is in the comments section. I will give you a name check in my next video. So anyway, back when Boo Berry and I did that first Black Sabbath video back in LA around Halloween time, it was the Black Sabbath Halloween special, the Ozzy era. Yes, I reviewed all the 70s Ozzy era albums, and I went into lengthy detail about my feelings about those albums and my history with the band. Then I did my second Black Sabbath video, which was a review of Heaven and Hell Mob Rules when those awesome deluxe editions came out. And that's when I took the opportunity to go into detail about those albums. And I gave them both an in-depth review. Then I reviewed everything else. Yes, I did a third video, which was Born Again and Seventh Star, the Tony Martin era, and onward. And I also talked about 13, and I pretty much covered everything. I even talked about some of Tony Iommi's side projects, which I'm not going to cover here. But I will talk about The Devil You Know, because come on, that's a Black Sabbath album. I mean, if we're counting anything that's past the Ozzy era as Black Sabbath, then we got to count that because it is the Mob Rules lineup. You want to see in-depth reviews of all those albums, the whole entire Black Sabbath discography, I put it all together in a playlist. So there, I'm going to leave a link down below. Plus, I also threw in the Ozzy Osbourne solo years from the 80s, because you probably want to know what I think about those albums too. This is just a Rank-A-Rama. It's just me ranking the albums. Yeah, I'll say a few things. I can't help myself. I've been drinking some cognac. I feel like talking about Black Sabbath a little bit. So I'll say a word here or there about these albums. Also, a few things I said in those videos, especially that first video I did back in the day. Let's just say I take some issues. I take some issues with my past self. And I'm going to correct those issues as I do this ranking of every Black Sabbath album, even counting those Black Sabbath albums that are really only Black Sabbath in name. But hell, if it says Black Sabbath on the album cover, I'm counting it as a Black Sabbath album. You can debate it in the comments section if you think that some of these albums shouldn't be considered Black Sabbath albums. Okay, let's do this. We're finally doing it. The Black Sabbath Rank-A-Rama is starting right now.
Frankenberry's got strawberry-flavored sweeties.
Count Chocula's got chocolate sweeties. Must be for me.
Hello, my name is Boo. Gentlemen, let me finish. Boo Berry, your new neighbor. I do not wish to frighten, just to borrow some milk and to explain about my new ghostly good blueberry-flavored cereal with a haunting blueberry taste. Boo Berry.
Well, boo to you, Blueberry.
Gentlemen, please, I just want to tell you about my new super sweet cereal, Boo Berry.
Frankenberry's got strawberry-flavored sweeties.
Count Chocula's got chocolate sweeties.
But I've got blueberry-flavored sweeties.
Frankenberry.
Count Chocula.
And brand new blueberry-flavored Boo Berry.
Just playing. No, we're doing the Rank-A-Rama. I'm just having a little fun with y'all. Just having a little fun. Thank you to Van Arkteknologies for providing me with that retro commercial. I will leave a link down below to Van Ark's awesome YouTube channel as well. Check it out. But now, no more playing. Now we're getting to the Rank-A-Rama. It's finally really happening. Yeah, for real this time. Number 20, 13, bottom of the barrel for me. It is my least favorite Black Sabbath album. It's not horrible. I mean, Black Sabbath. I don't think Black Sabbath ever released a horrible album. But They almost did with this one. I hate the production. Rick Rubin's fucking brick-walled production. The drumming, I don't like it. They should have got Bill Ward or someone that could at least sound like Bill Ward. And it's the most derivative and unimaginative Tony Iommi has ever been. This is the only time where I feel like Tony Iommi is just kind of phoning it in and repeating himself. And Ozzy doesn't sound that great. He sounds lifeless and like they're just fucking auto-tuning him, and it's sad. Geezer sounds good. Geezer sounds good, and I like that they got Geezer kind of up in the mix. That's about all I gotta say. Not a big fan of this album, and it's very disappointing considering that this was the one chance we had to have a Black Sabbath album again, and with the original lineup. And first, they don't bring Bill Ward back with them, and then they give us this. Not that hot, but I keep it in my music library. 19, an album that I once said was my least favorite Black Sabbath album until I realized it was 13. Forbidden. Yeah, not that hot, not that good. But listening to it again for this Rank-A-Rama, I was like, I kind of like it better than 13. It's a little livelier. It's not quite as derivative. Yeah, it's kind of stupid and dumbed down, especially by Tony Iommi's lofty standards. But I heard worse records. It still manages to be of the time, and yet it's not like Tony's like hopping on every new trend. And that's something I give him credit for throughout the Tony Martin era, is that he did a good job of slowly but surely evolving Sabbath's sound and updating it for each era, but without totally changing the essence of what he's about as a musician and songwriter. And I think you could say that about Forbidden. And for that reason alone, I like it a little bit better than 13. But still, not that great. Number 18, another Tony Martin era album, Cross Purposes. This album actually grew on me a little bit. I mean, yeah, it's still pretty low on the list, but this album's, it's kind of decent. Yeah, I think it's a kind of decent album. It grew on me. So already, Black Sabbath is doing kind of decent albums on my Rank-A-Rama list. So that's not so bad. It's got dark, it's broody. There's some good hooks here and there. Like I said before, Tony Iommi did a good job of updating Sabbath's sound without totally caving into trends. And I dig it. It's not a bad album. Not a bad album. Number 17, The Devil You Know. This is the album from that band called Heaven and Hell that I was talking about earlier. Of course, Heaven and Hell is just Mob Rules era Black Sabbath. But now they're old, so they don't kick ass nearly as much. But that being said, I prefer it to 13, yeah. And obviously, those last two Tony Martin era albums, it's essentially like them doing a heavy doom metal album for Ronnie James Dio. But Ronnie, even though his voice was in decline here and his health, sadly, he still sounds more authentic and like he cares more than Ozzy did on 13, or I think his last 20 years of his solo career. It sounds like he's invested in the material. The band don't sound as derivative as they do on 13. These sound like kind of new, fresher riffs, in my opinion. It's a little slow. It's a little one note compared to the stuff they did in the past. But I still think overall it's more authentic and more soulful and more powerful than what they did when they reunited for Ozzy on 13. In a lot of ways, this is more what I wish 13 was like if they were going to just focus on their doom metal side. And I like it. I think it's a good album. So wow, we're already at good albums. It's almost like Black Sabbath is a great band or something. Number 16, Headless Cross. A good album. I think it's good. Tony Martin stuff, I admit, it took me a while to get into it. At first, I was like, a little too European sounding for my taste. But I grew to like it. I grew to like the Tony Martin era. And this is solid, melodic, heavy metal music. Classic, traditional heavy metal music, putting emphasis on music, melodies, hooks. It's not one big therapy session and a bunch of assholes trying to out-heavy each other. It's fucking musical. If you like shit like Judas Priest, if you like shit like Dokken, well, then you should like Tony Martin era Sabbath. It's similar shit to that shit. But when I say shit, I don't mean bad shit. I mean good shit. I dig it. Number 15, an album that's very similar to Headless Cross, but a little bit better. The Eternal Idol. Yes, this is the first one they did of Tony Martin. I mean, there's a case that this is a great album. For me, it's just really, really good. Overall, even though I do like the Tony Martin era, it just doesn't connect with me as much as the stuff they did beforehand. Tony Martin, especially on these first two albums they did with him, he does just sound like Dio light, in my opinion. Like Ronnie James Dio, but without the nasty little bite. But still, he's a sufficient singer. He gets the job done. This has a great production. The songs are all very strong. The hooks are very strong. Tony Iommi is still bringing it. And there's really nothing wrong with this album. If you're into the Dio era, if you're into Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, then go straight to the Eternal Idol and Headless Cross, because it's the band continuing that kind of music. They're continuing that kind of music, but with a different singer. So a strong number 15 for the Eternal Idol. Number 14. This might be controversial to some people, unless you're in the Mofos and Metal group, that I'm ranking something from the 70s, classic Ozzy era. Yes, I'm ranking one of those albums this low. And obviously I'm putting up Dio stuff and one Tony Martin album ahead of it. So that might be a little controversial to some fans. And I like this album, just so you know, so don't get mad. I do like this album. I think it's a good album, but it is my least favorite from the 70s. And I am talking about Technical Ecstasy. In theory, this album's doing everything right. It's eclectic. It's doing a lot of different stuff that I love that they did on Sabotage and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. But I just don't think it's as effective, and the songs on the whole are as strong as anything they did on their first 6 albums, and obviously a few afterward. I do really like it. There are a few good songs here that I really do love, but overall, it doesn't have quite the same energy and punchiness, and I don't think it's their best set of songs in the classic Ozzy era. But I do like it. It's a good album, so strong 14. Number 13. Now, this will be the last album from the Tony Martin era that we discussed, but in my opinion, it's the best one. Tyr at 13. Yeah, so that shows you I'm not a hater. I have an open mind. I put it ahead of Technical Ecstasy. Am I crazy? Maybe. But I love this album. Tyr kicks ass. It features Cozy Powell on drums, and he helped produce it with Tony Iommi. To me, it's the best sounding of the Tony Martin era albums, and I also think it's Tony Martin's strongest singing. This is proto-Viking metal. Yeah, it's a proto-Viking metal classic. So if you're into Viking metal, you should love this album. Very melodic. If you like stuff like Progressive, Maiden, or Queensryche, and stuff like that, you should dig this album. I just think this is the most consistently catchy and exciting of all the Tony Martin era albums, and it's definitely the one that I return back to the most. But despite my love of this album, and I think it's a great album, by the way, so yeah, we're already into great albums, and we haven't even reached the top 10 yet, but I still don't have that same connection to the Tony Martin era, even when it's as great as this, as I do with earlier incarnations of the band. So moving on to number 12, Seventh Star. This is probably the album that grew the most on me since I did that video. I said that I liked this album, I thought it was good, but I didn't think Glenn Hughes, despite being an amazing singer, really worked with Tony Iommi in the Sabbath sound. And I said that I thought that Tyr and the Eternal Idol were better. Definitely as like melodic metal albums, they might be stronger, but I decided that I just overall dig this album more, and I go back to it more. Seventh Star is an album I listen to quite a bit. It was intended to be a Tony Iommi solo album, and so it just has this very unique vibe. It's a very unique entry into Black Sabbath discography for that reason. And when you think about it, those terms, Glenn Hughes fits perfectly because he was going for a different sound, more of a catchy pop metal sound, but still with strong riffs, strong hooks, one of the most modern sounding things Tony Iommi had done at that point. A very unique thing just unto itself, especially because Glenn Hughes is more of like a soul singer. Even when he was in Deep Purple, he was not like singing the hard rocking songs. That was usually David Coverdale in Mark III and Mark IV, Mark III and Mark IV. Normally Glenn Hughes sang the funkier songs, like the R&B songs. Like he has a more of a R&B sounding voice. That's one of the things that makes this album really unique, and it's one of the things that I keep going back to. Tony Martin, as good as he can be at times, he's still very derivative of Dio. Whereas Glenn Hughes, like the first 3 singers for Black Sabbath, he's his own man, and he brings something very unique to this album. The songs are really strong for the most part. I love this album. It's a very strong number 12. Number 11, Dehumanizer. Badass album. Very heavy. Their heaviest album for Ronnie James Dio. No, obviously I don't think it's as strong as the first two they did with Dio, but it's still a very strong album. And as much as I like some of that Tony Martin stuff, man, when Ronnie comes into the band, just a different animal. It's a meaner, badder, more ass-kicking animal. And he was the one that was really pushing him into this heavier, darker direction. Just listen to the albums he did before and after this in Dio, and listen to what Tony Iommi was doing with Tony Martin before and after this. I talk more about this in that other video, that third Black Sabbath video I did. So yeah, this is coming from Dio. He pushed him into this heavier direction, and this is the Mob Rules lineup, and it's just ass-kicking. It's like one of these albums that initially I felt it was a little one note, and the songs all kind of sounded alike, but the more you listen to it, the more you hear all the little tiny nuances and subtle mood and musical shifts, and it's a really masterful album. In a lot of ways, it's like their master of reality, but with Ronnie James Dio, and with more of a early 90s production, which is a shortcoming. I mean, I wish it sounded more like the 70s, because I think production was superior in the 70s. But despite that, despite not really loving the production, the songs are all strong, they grow on you. This is like top shelf heavy metal music, and this is heavy metal music. I love this album. Love Dehumanizer. A very strong number 11. All right, now we're getting into the top 10. And since I have all of my top 10 favorite Black Sabbath albums on vinyl, we're going to start doing it this way now. Number 10, Never Say Die. Never Say Die. I love this album. It's progressive, it's interesting, it's hard rock. Oh, heaven forbid, it's a hard rock album. It's a very progressive, awesome hard rock album, and it brings out the jazzy side. A jazzy side that was kind of always there since the first album, because Sabbath has blues and jazz roots. Bill Ward especially always had a very strong jazz swing, I think. But in Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, that side, that jazz side, start to come out more, which I think is awesome. I mean, I'm also a jazz fan, so I love that. And on this album, they bring it out even more. I mean, it's almost a jazz rock album at times. Like, there's a lot of jazzy stuff. There's some good, snappy, catchy rock tunes as well. But the jazz side is what's really interesting. Some like meat-headed metalhead. To him, it might sound like yacht rock. Tony Iommi, and I said this a bit about Glenn and KK and Judas Priest, that you could tell when you heard their earlier stuff in the mid-70s, that you could tell later on that they were really restricting themselves. Even though I love the shit they did in the 80s, you can hear that they were kind of dumbing themselves down musically a little bit to kind of fit more into that heavy metal box. Likewise, and this is what's funny when these dumb metalheads are saying like, oh, Sabbath was like boring in the 70s. It's like, no, it's the opposite. Like, they were more adventurous. They were doing different things. They were actually doing jazz and different styles of music. Progressively, as you go into the 80s and then the 90s and then onward, you'll hear Tony Iommi does less and less of that. I think his guitar solos got even better in the 80s. But overall, he's definitely restricting himself and not quite as adventurous as he was in the 70s. Because I love all kinds of music. Like, I listen to this album and I think, wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if, like, Black Sabbath did do a yacht rock album in the mid-70s? Wouldn't that be awesome if they just had an album of jazz-influenced, loungy, soft rock? I think it would be really good. Actually, it wouldn't be good. It'd be great. I want to hear that album. I want to hear Sailing Sabbath. Number 9, Born Again. Yeah. Look at that devil baby. That devil baby's awesome. A very popular album in the Mofos of Metal Facebook group, but it's great nonetheless. The one and only Ralph Vieira, who knows his Black Sabbath better than anyone else on the goddamn planet. Yes, Ralph Vieira, he loves this album even more than the first two of Dio. I get it. Hey, I think any of these albums in the top 10, if they're your favorite album, you're not wrong. But to me, I just don't think the songs are quite as strong and the production is quite as perfect as those first two Dio albums, or obviously the first 6 with Ozzy. That being said, I do love the production. I love the dark and fucked up, wonky production. I think, like a lot of people, it brings out the evil quality of this album. And yeah, this is a heavy album. It's one of their heaviest albums. I mean, you can make a case that Master of Reality and Dehumanizer are just as heavy in their own way, but Born Again definitely gives them a run for the money. It could be Black Sabbath's heaviest album if you're all about the heaviness. And Ian Gillan from Deep Purple, that's Deep Purple Mark II, yeah, 2 different singers from Deep Purple have sung with Tony Iommi. But this one, I guess, makes more sense because he's a hard rock singer. And God, he sings metal. This is a heavy metal album. It's a full-fledged heavy metal album. And he's singing his balls off. He sounds great. He's definitely, I think, the third best Black Sabbath singer. But ultimately, I think he belongs to Deep Purple. And Black Sabbath's two greatest singers are Ozzy or Dio. But Ian Gillan did a great job. He did a great job. And you would think this album would be a disaster, but it was not. It's a triumph. It's a metal masterpiece. And I love this album. And I'm glad to see that it has a cult following. But just because it has a cult following, and just because some of you metalheads are losing your shit over it, fucking recognize the greatness of the first six with Ozzy. You can't touch them. Although this comes close, so close that number 8 is Paranoid. Yes, their most popular album, number 8, Paranoid. Hey, this is only because the album is burned out. Not when I listen to it on vinyl. When I listen to it on vinyl, I hear it and like, yeah, this is one of the greatest albums of all time. I do think it's unfortunate that this is like the only album of theirs that has songs that get heavily played on classic rock radio. Most like basic people, if they knew anything from Black Sabbath, it's going to be like the 3 big songs from this album. And that's unfortunate because to me, Black Sabbath, especially the first 8, I would say with Ozzy and the first 2 with Dio, those albums are loaded with songs that should have been played on classic rock radio for decades. And they should be staples, like everyone should know. Like Sabbath, they're on the same level as Led Zeppelin or AC/DC. And these albums should be mined far more for radio staples, in my opinion, because the songs are catchy, they're accessible, they're adventurous. Just the idea that you'd go to Paranoid, where I actually think that they have 5 other stronger albums of Ozzy. But that being said, Paranoid in and of itself is a great album. I still especially love the deep tracks on it. It's one of the most important metal albums of all time. And yes, when this came out, it was considered heavy metal. And you know what? That doesn't change. It doesn't change just because the genre evolves and there's new subgenres. Yes, you can label those new offsets and those new subgenres a different name, but the source still remains the same. Fucking gold doesn't stop being gold just because you create some new shit around it. That gold is still gold. You get what I'm saying? Oil is still oil. Cash is still cash, even if you got fucking bitcoins. Unless you got a fucking time machine and you could go back there and split the DNA of fucking heavy metal. You can't change what was heavy metal in the 70s. Sometimes it was hard rock, sometimes it's heavy metal. They weren't all the way there yet. They were busy creating it. They were creators, changing rock and roll music as we know it. And you know when it all started? It all started with this album, Black Sabbath. Number 7, the album that invented heavy metal music. Recognize. Check that out. Check it out. Number 7, the self-titled debut, Black Sabbath, one of the most innovative and awesome albums of all time. This one has actually kind of dropped over the years in my ranking. When I first did that Halloween special, I had it in my top 5. I did do a quick kind of half-ass ranking in that video. And I still do love it. This is a very, very strong 7. I think it's a masterpiece. All these albums are masterpieces at this point. There's just a couple albums that I've just grown to love even more. And the thing is, this is a little bit of a seasonal album for me. I love it during this time, Halloween time. This is a great Halloween album. It's got this folk horror vibe. I love it. I like the hippie jamminess. I love a lot of 60s music. I like some jamminess, some cool jazziness, but they also have some doom metal. They invented it. They invented not just heavy metal, but the subgenre doom metal as well. This is vanguard music. They were changing everything with this album. There's still bands, there's still underground bands just trying to sound like Sabbath did on their first couple albums. And I love this album. A very, very strong number 7. But yes, over the years, especially since I got those deluxe editions of 2 certain albums that I gushed all over about, I'm still going crazy for the first 2 for Ronnie James Dio. But where did I rank them exactly? They actually broke into the top 6. They actually knocked out 2 classic Ozzy era albums. So wow, they must really be awesome. Well, here we go. At number 6, Mob Rules. Mob Rules. A very strong number 6. There was a time I thought it was better in Heaven and Hell, but over the years I kind of flipped on that. I think Heaven and Hell is just a little more perfect, but goddamn, this is close. This is close to perfect, and one could argue that it's even a little heavier than Heaven and Hell. But yeah, Mob Rules, a great follow-up. To me, this is a lot like For Those About to Rock, We Salute You after Back in Black. Both amazing albums. It's kind of like Heaven and Hell Part 2, but it's a strong Part 2. This is very close to God tier, but I don't think it's God tier. I think it's damn close, though. It's like one notch below God tier, but it is fucking majestic. It's one of the strongest 80s metal albums ever. And yeah, this is metal music, although it has a few hard rock moments, and it's very melodic. It's still catchy. It's music. It's still musical. And it is great. And in fact, the only thing that's slightly better than this album, when we're talking about the Ronnie James Dio era Black Sabbath, is Heaven and Hell. Yeah, Heaven and Hell. Number 5. Ronnie and the boys break into number 5. Yeah, this is a perfect album. Every note, every hook, everything about this. It's a musical masterpiece. One of the strongest early 80s metal albums. Showed that Sabbath can go into a new decade and be competitive with all the bands that they had influenced. Like, this is competitive with all those other great 80s albums and a lot of stuff from the new wave of British heavy metal. This is competitive with Iron Maiden and what Motorhead and Judas Priest were doing. And Martin Birch, God, what a great producer he was. Everything about this album is great. The one thing I will say that I think is even stronger with Dio era Sabbath is Tony Iommi's guitar solos. He really takes his guitar solos to the next level, especially on this album. Lonely is the Word is my favorite Tony Iommi guitar solo of all time. This album is a metal masterpiece. If it is your favorite Sabbath album, even if you put it ahead of any of the Ozzy era stuff, hey, I can't fault you. It's a great album. But to me, it's not quite God tier. That would be the next 4 albums we're talking about. Us in the know, us people in the know, us Sabbath lovers, like to talk in terms of the first 6 of Ozzy. As great and innovative as the first 2 albums are, there was room for improvement. But that improvement did not come with Dio. It came with the Ozzy-fronted band themselves with the next 4 albums. The 4 albums that they did from Master of Reality to Sabotage, that 4-album run, to me, that's God tier. That's God tier. And it transcends heavy metal music. They're not just metal masterpieces. Like, these are just musical masterpieces. Yeah, that's right. We're talking like Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Miles Davis. We're talking music, just music. Like, these 4 albums to me reach that level of quality. Yeah, here we go. This is a big upset because this album was my second favorite Black Sabbath album for a very long time. Like, I don't know, like 15 years. This was like locked in there as number 2. But in the past couple years, I just started shifting towards these 2 other albums. My number 1 has always been my number 1 and always will be. That's really locked in there. But number 2 was not as locked in there as I thought because it's been pushed down to number 4, Master of Reality. That's right, Master of Reality. It's tough saying this is my 4th favorite Black Sabbath album. Listen, for a long time, like I said, it was my 2nd favorite. It's a masterpiece. This is where the whole down-tuning began, and it inspired not just traditional heavy metal and doom metal, it also inspired grunge, and just so many different forms of music come from this album specifically. I mean, you could argue this is the most innovative Black Sabbath album of all time. If you do not love Master of Reality, you do not love heavy metal, you're a goddamn poser. Because this is one of the most truest and purest fucking heavy metal albums you will ever listen to. But it is so great that it transcends heavy metal as well. This is still an album I listen to several times a year. Like, I never have a year where I don't listen to Master of Reality a few times. And this is another album, like the first album, that I love listening to during Halloween time. It's a nice, witchy, dark-sounding album. It has a witchy vibe. And, like there's a real mysticism to it. It's not like pretend time. It has that atmosphere, that vibe from that time period, that early 70s vibe, which I love, and the production. There's a case that this is like the greatest guitar tone of all time. Tony Iommi has the greatest guitar tone of all time. And the way the bass sounds too, the drums, everything. It's an amazing album. This was hard. It was really hard to put this as number 4. But I just had to be honest that I just do prefer the other albums more these days that I put ahead of it. But this is a very, very, very strong 4. Sabotage! Sabotage! Check it out! God, I love this album. If Master Reality had their greatest guitar tone, I think this has their greatest production. And it's definitely the greatest vocal performance in Ozzy's career. He came very close. He was very close with the album right before it. But to me, this is the one where he hit his vocal peak. People that say Ozzy can't sing, obviously they haven't listened to Sabotage. His singing is on a whole other level on this album. It's very heavy in places, has Symptom of the Universe, which could have been the song that created thrash, but it's more interesting than just that. There's the acoustic moments and I guess that hippie stuff. I think the first side of Sabotage could be the greatest thing they ever did. I love the second side. Don't think it's quite as strong as the first side, but it is still very strong. I love it all. And like I've been saying, it transcends metal. This is just great rock music. It's just great music, period. If you don't love Sabotage, you're wrong. You are actually objectively, scientifically wrong to not love this god tier musical masterpiece. So there you go. A very, very, very strong number 3. Oh my God, how great are the next 2 albums? How great are they? My new second favorite Black Sabbath album of all time, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Their greatest album cover. I always thought that. But now it's also my second favorite Black Sabbath album. Back when I did that first Black Sabbath video, for whatever reason, I was a little burned out on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath at the time. It's always been one of my favorite Sabbath albums. But I said it was like my 5th favorite in that video. I thought the second side was a little weak and I didn't like Fluff being the 3rd track and I was real nitpicky and I watched that video and I cringed a bit. I hated what I had to say about Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. But I've matured since then. Since I made that video, I've matured. My ears have further evolved. And I hear that I was wrong. This album is amazing. And that second side, that's the thing that made me put it ahead of Sabotage, ultimately. As great as that second side of Sabotage is, I decided that this second side's actually a little stronger. I love Who Are You? That's such a weird synthy song, and I like where it gets into that piano part, and it gets really progressive and interesting. That's the thing that's lacking in a lot of later Sabbath stuff, and like 13, is that they're just focusing on like the first 2 or 3 albums and ignoring this whole great mid-70s progressive period where they're doing all this different stuff. I love that they did a weird synthy song like Who Are You? And looking for today, that's another song that I said in that video, I'm embarrassed to say, I thought it was like one of the weaker tracks. Not bad, but not quite God tier. Well, this is God tier. This is amazing. Looking for today is just euphoric, beautiful, fucking righteous rock song with some jazzy stuff in the chorus, and it's amazing. I love that song. And Spiral Architect, I did, of course, say that was great, but listening to it, as great as the writ is, I think Spiral Architect is the greatest finale on the Black Sabbath album. It's my favorite last song on the Black Sabbath album. This is Beatles level shit. This is Beatles level shit here. With the orchestra and the mixture of acoustic and electric guitars, Ozzy's fucking heartfelt vocals. It sounded like Ozzy cared back then, you know? You listen to that and there's like so much heart and so much soul. Like, how could you be a human being and listen to Spiral Architect and not get a surge, not get a feeling? And then, goddamn, that first side, the title track, arguably the greatest Black Sabbath song from an objective standpoint. My personal favorite's still one from Volume 4. But this is like a close second for me. This is like one of the greatest Sabbath songs of all time. Love that. National Acrobat, also amazing. I love it. I've grown to like the quirky placement of putting Fluff as the 3rd song, and it's a nice break between a National Acrobat and Sabracadabra. A great hard rock song. Yeah, hard rock song about love. Suck on it, metal virgins. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is like everything I love about music. The band stretching out, doing different things, different genres, and mastering them all. It's a perfect fucking album. A very strong number 2. That's one of the reasons why I was eager to do this Rank-A-Rama, because I feel like I undervalued Sabbath Bloody Sabbath in that very first Black Sabbath video I did. So now I've done it justice. A masterful album. It's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. Volume 4. Yes, it is my number 1 favorite Black Sabbath album. Not a surprise. Most people that watch my videos know that Black Sabbath Volume 4 is not only my favorite Black Sabbath album, it's my favorite heavy metal album, if you want to call it heavy metal. It's just one of my favorite albums, period. And everything I said about it in that first Black Sabbath video, I still think, and when you think about it, it's gotta be Volume 4 because it's like that perfect bridge. It's got that guitar tone from Master Reality. So it's got that sludgy, dark, down-tuned heaviness from Master Reality and that dark, majestic vibe. But you got the progressiveness of Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage creeping in there. Got your changes, your Laguna Sunrise, you got the different shades. Hell, even FX, I've grown to like. It's like the Beatles would do, like that wrong note, that disconcerting wrong note or thing that just sounds like something they're fucking around with in the studio that they really shouldn't put on an album. But in a way, that's the thing that makes it unsettling. Got Supernaut, one of the greatest songs of all time. My very favorite Black Sabbath song of all time is Snowblind. I said it back then, and I still say it now. Snowblind's still my favorite Black Sabbath song. Cornucopia, Not Far Behind. I really love that song. Under the Sun's great. Everything's great. It's an amazing album. There's not one wrong note. It's a perfect album. It works as a metal album. I mean, even though it's got stuff like changes on it, when it's heavy, and it's got that guitar tone. And if you listen to this and you're not connecting to it as a metalhead, let me take away that fucking heavy metal card. And if you listen to this just as a rock album, as a classic rock, hard rock album, and it's not doing it for you, let me take away your fucking classic rock card. Yeah, you don't deserve that too. Get out of here. Come back when you're serious, when you want to sit at the table with the fucking adults and listen to some high quality music, okay? Volume 4, a masterpiece for the ages, and a very strong number 1. That's my boozy Black Sabbath Rank-A-Rama. So we finally did it. If you want to weigh in or give me your list, give me your ranking, put that in the comments section. That's what it's about. It's about music and us all having a conversation. I want to hear what you have to say about these great albums. Okay, maybe a couple of them towards the bottom there aren't that great in my opinion. But most of them are great.